that you're here, and Happy New Year. Nick shared last week, and really thankful for his time in the Word, and we were able to learn from him last week. My name is Kris, and serve here as the lead pastor, and I'm really thankful that you're here. Whether this is your first time or you've been here for years and years and years, you are welcome here, and really thankful that you're here. We desire to follow Jesus here. We're trying to figure out what that means together. It's pretty messy. It's pretty sloppy because we're pretty messy. We're pretty sloppy people just as human beings. And we don't have it together, and we don't pretend to have it together here. And so if that sounds something like you, maybe this is a place that you can pursue Jesus this year and figure out what that means, whether that's an entry step or continue to follow after him. And so we're so grateful. And one of the foundations that we're going to build upon this year, again, we did this last year as well, is we're going to start off with 21 days of fasting and prayer beginning today. And we invite you to join in whatever capacity that looks like in your life, whatever way that you may feel a prompt, we invite you to be a part of that. But we as a church want to be praying these next 3 weeks together as that foundation for this new year. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a series of questions throughout the time that we're together here and ask you to reflect upon them. Bluntly, there's no way to fully reflect upon them in the few seconds that I give you after I ask each question. And so some people in first service, they wrote them down. Feel free to take pictures of them, whatever they may be. There's probably 4 or 5 different questions that I'm going to ask you to consider as we walk in this season. So the first question right off the bat here that I want to ask you is, have you ever made a commitment to God that has changed the course of your life? Have you ever made a commitment to God that has changed the course of your life? If you're following Jesus, I hope the immediate thought you had of like, yeah, well, I'm following Jesus, so that transforms who I am as a human being, how I interact with other people, and the way I look and act and move throughout the world. I hope that is something that you think about immediately. Maybe beyond that or within that is another commitment that you've made at some point. Maybe some sort of decision within life that has transformed the course of your life, that may be connected to following Jesus, maybe not. What is it? Have you ever made a commitment to God that has changed the course of your life, and then what is it? One commitment that I immediately thought of is, as a 22-year-old graduate, I made a commitment that was beyond just my own faith in Christ, but it was 24 years ago. I said, yeah, I'm going to come back here for summer, and many of you know this, is that I came back just to fill in with the youth group. There was a need here, and I had a business degree and had just done an internship in Philadelphia with the Sixers and Flyers, and was thinking about what could that look like, and Pastor Gerton said, hey, we need some help with the students. Will you come for 3 months? Yes, absolutely, I'm here. And then 24 years later, I'm still here. You don't have to applaud. That's kind of you. I was not looking for applause. And I saw those of you that did not applaud. I took note of that. So, just totally joking. Is that decision, that yes, what seemed like a small yes, I can come back for a short while I figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. That month 4, I had 0 plans of being here. And so that yes was a yes that came as a result of prayer and fasting. And other decisions in life have come from prayer and fasting. And I wish I could say that that's just every decision in my life. Every decision is rooted in prayer. Every decision is rooted in fasting, and it's not. But I desire to know God's heart more and more. And he gave us the gift, these tools of prayer and fasting. It is more than empty ritual to pray. It is more than empty ritual to fast. We're completely missing the point when all it is that tool or ritual. So in these 21 days, our heart is to know God's heart better. Our desire is to seek guidance individually and also corporately as a church. And we want to dive into prayer and fasting intentionally. Now, throughout the weeks, we're going to talk about these 2 things, but fasting is something we see throughout the entire Scripture. One of the earliest examples of fasting is Moses. In Moses, we can tell that he fasted at least twice in 2 40-day fasts. 40 days fasting, 40 days. 40 minutes, some of you are hungry, right? Like you're at the end of service, you're like, man, I need some food. 40 days Moses fasted. Once when he was receiving the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, and then another time in that similar setting when the golden calf was being worshipped. David fasted in personal crises. When his child was ill, he fasted. Also, he was mourning the death of Saul and Jonathan, and he was fasting. Elijah fasted for 40 days while fleeing Queen Jezebel, and it really led to massive spiritual renewal. Esther asked the Jewish people to fast with her before she went to the king to ask for protection. Jesus fasted. I mean, if Jesus is fasting, there's a good example. He fasted for 40 days in the wilderness to prepare for his ministry and mission. Paul, he fasted after his conversion, and we see him fasting throughout his ministry. And the early church, too, fasted quite often. In fact, fasting, both in the West and the East, has been a common occurrence up until about 100 years ago in the West, like where we're at. About 100 years ago, it was still common practice for people following Jesus to fast 2 times a week. In fact, John Wesley, years and years before, would not allow anyone to be in the ministry unless they were actively fasting at least 2 times a week. I am guessing most of us have not fasted 2 times in the last, fill in the blank, right? It is not a common practice that we do. If we fast, maybe we're intermittent fasting. Like I'm not eating in this block of time, and I'm only eating my meals in this block of time, but it's for a dietary, it's for the health reason. Fasting within our culture has really shifted into more of health benefits than spiritual benefits. If you go on Amazon and you type in fasting under books, you're going to find numerous books on the health benefits of fasting before you have any sort of commentary or books on the spiritual practice of fasting. Fasting is different in the way we look at it, but fasting is powerful, especially in our busy, food-abundant culture. Because fasting and also prayer, it creates space for God. Now, if you were to look out, say, 5-10 years into the future, most of us would have no idea what we're going to do 5 to 10 years on this day in the future, right? But I'm guessing, hopefully you wake up. That would be one thing. Another thing that you are almost 100% guaranteed to do that day is eat. You don't really know anything else you'll be doing in 5 to 10 years, but you will most likely eat. Isn't that interesting that food is just this constant rhythm along with waking up, going to sleep, breathing? It is part of our everyday rhythm. Most of you ate before coming here. Most of you will eat after. You're going to eat tomorrow. Like it is part of that rhythm. And when food is pulled out of your rhythm, it changes your day. And some of you walk in like the whole hangry reality, that like hungry, angry deal, that hangry thing. Some of you walk in that. If you miss a meal or you miss your snack, oh, watch out, right? Right? Yeah, it's true. And you're not looking at the person next to you. Good job. Food is such an abundant reality of our everyday rhythm. So to fast, to break up that rhythm, creates that disruption that leaves space for us to connect with God. It is an opportunity for us to humble ourselves before God. It is an opportunity to seek Him in prayer. It is an opportunity to seek guidance. It's an opportunity to grieve. It is an opportunity for that communion with the Lord that we would quickly bypass because we're filling it with food. Now, in fasting, there is a benefit that we receive. There's no doubt. But our goal, our purpose is not to go and get from Jesus, but rather to give oneself to Jesus. We fast to give ourselves to the Lord. And fasting, just to be super, super clear, is not eating food. People will be tempted, like, I'm just going to fast from social media, which may be a great thing. I'm going to fast from TV, which may be a great thing. I'm going to fast from the news. Great, wonderful. But that goes along with the food part. And so fasting is a body discipline. We're to offer our bodies, soma is the word, as a living sacrifice. And we offer our bodies, not just our heart and our mind, but we offer our bodies as that living sacrifice to draw near to God. And these rhythms allow us to make space for prayer. Hunger sends us to prayer. See, if you choose to fast in these 21 days, whatever sort of fast you choose to do, you're going to be like, oh, I need my snack. Oh, I need lunch. And you'll be like, oh. All right, prayer. I need to pray. That should be the shift from the food to the prayer. And God will speak. God will fill. God will be there for us if we are present to him. I imagine for you, there's something in your life that you're facing. There's some sort of hurdle, some sort of roadblock, something that's a challenge. I imagine for you, there is some sort of pressure you're feeling in your life. I imagine for you, there's some level of desire for you to know God and for God to know you. I mean, you're here this morning, so at least there's like an inkling of that reality. I'm guessing. For God's will to be known in your life and for us to offer ourselves to him. So a question that I have for you is, in what way or in what ways is God asking you to trust him? In what way or ways is God asking you to trust him? And how might that be connected to prayer and fasting? So just take a moment and reflect on that. Maybe jot something down. I want to invite you to turn to Daniel chapter 1. It's on page 719 in the black Bibles that are in the chairs, if you're looking for that. Daniel is found in the Old Testament. Daniel is what's known as a prophet, one who's bringing forth the word of the Lord to the people. And Daniel is an example of someone who lived a set-apart life, someone who had these desires, who were seeking the Lord and spoke for the people to give the message of God. Daniel lived in the 6th century BC. And about the same time, some other things that were happening in the world was that the Acropolis in Athens was beginning to be built. Mayan civilization was flourishing. Aesop was writing his fables. Confucius and Buddha lived at the same time. The Greeks introduced the olive tree to Italy. And the Phoenicians had made their first known voyage around Africa. These things are all unfolding. And in Daniel's world, Daniel tells about how Babylon has attacked Jerusalem. They've plundered the city, they've plundered the temple, and they're taken many Israelites into exile. And so Daniel chapter 1, starting in verse 1, it says, "In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. He carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia, and put it in the treasure house of his God. So what Nebuchadnezzar was doing was not just this grab of, I'm gathering up wealth, but rather he's taking all the treasures from the temple of the one true God, the God of the Israelites. He's putting it in his temple, and it's a power move. What it is he's saying, your God does not deserve these treasures. My God does. And now that they're in my temple, this is the one supreme God. So Nebuchadnezzar is doing that, taking what was there. Verse 3 says, "Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, king of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians." So not only is Nebuchadnezzar taking the past from the Israelites, taking their treasures and putting them in the temple of his God, he's also taking their future. He's taking the young men, the men 13 to 17, the best in this age group, and taking them to Babylon. He's taking their future. He's already taken the past. He's taking their future. And what he's doing is he's saying, these are living trophies of my victory. And he's beginning an indoctrination process. What did it say? He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. So he's saying, hey, let's leave your language behind. Let's leave your literature behind. I want you to learn ours. And it continues on in verse 5. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years. and after they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief gave them new names: to Daniel, the name Belteshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego. So what did he do? He started training them in a new language and with new literature. He's changing their diets. He's changing their names. See, the names that they had meant things like God is my judge, and beloved by the Lord, and who is as God, and the Lord is my help. The names that Nebuchadnezzar changed them to were names pointing to the sky god, to the sun god, to the wine goddess, to the god of fire, saying we are realigning your perspective, your priorities, even in your name. And so for 3 years, what they said, how they said it, what they thought, what they consumed, what they were called was all being changed. And what it was a complete identity shift. This is who you were. This is who you now are. For 3 years. Leave everything behind of who you were. Nebuchadnezzar was saying, I want you to look to me and to my gods for everything you need. What did Daniel do? Verse 8. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief officials for permission not to defile himself this way. So, Daniel had to make a decision. And I imagine Daniel did not make his decision in the moment when he was offered the food. I mean, imagine being at the best restaurant you've ever been at. Some fancy, plating where the food is about this big, and then they've got all the different colors of, the wonderful flavors of sauces on the plate and the little dots on the corners. Or maybe it's like an all-inclusive buffet. You're on a cruise or you're at a resort. Imagine being walked in there and saying, hey, this is all yours. And in that moment, you're like, no, thank you. I'll take something else. It's hard to resist when you're in the middle of whatever appears to be good. I imagine Daniel, one who, as we'll continue to see, was a man of prayer, one who practiced fasting just because it's what everyone did who was faithful to God in his day, did not make the decision when he was looking at the king's table. I imagine his heart was prepared before he walked into that case, in that situation. Because in the heat of the moment, it's hard to make the right decision. For example, today, you may be around someone later today that is really hard to get along with. They're not here with you. They're somewhere else, right? Is that you may be around them later today. See, you can get in the moment when they say whatever it is or give you that look or you get that feeling, and then just whatever comes out of your mouth comes out of your mouth. Not very wise. Or you can resolve now of like, listen, I know this is going to be challenging. I know it's going to be difficult to be around this person. So I'm going to resolve now not to engage in that conversation or not to allow my anger to get to this point or whatever it may be. Or if you're in some sort of dating relationship, like if you're in that place by yourself with that person, that is not the time to decide on boundaries, okay? Right? That is something you decide before you get in that situation. Or if you have access to money, whether it's your own or someone else's, is when you have that before you and there's something you want, you need to make the decision, resolve ahead of time to be moral, ethical, godly with that. And Daniel resolved not to defile himself. He resolved ahead of time. Not to defile, which means to stain or pollute oneself. So he decided ahead of time that, I'm going to do something different. We as human beings, we make decisions essentially in two different ways or for two different motivations. One, we make a decision to gain pleasure. This choice will give me pleasure in my life, whatever that pleasure may be. Or we make decisions to avoid pain. I know this situation will be painful, so I'm going to make a decision to do something else. That's how we're motivated, to move towards pleasure or to move away from pain. That's how we're wired. And so for Daniel, he is resolved not to defile himself because he knows what is pleasurable and he knows what is painful. Daniel, in this situation, He could have made the decision just to eat the food. I mean, it wasn't part of his dietary laws. It had probably been sacrificed to idols. Him eating at a table in Eastern culture is a sign of joining one another in friendship. And so he knew that he would be compromising these areas. He also knew that rejecting the king's menu meant rejecting the king. He's opening himself up to punishment. Nebuchadnezzar was not the kindest individual when it came to punishment. It also spoiled his chances of advancement. See, some of us in this room, we have compromised something in the moment with the hope that if I compromise now, I'm going to step into another situation in life, and then I'll have more influence and more opportunity to really make the impact, to really honor God. Or maybe some of you are at this point where you're like, if I just compromise now, that'll get me to this place, and then it'll be good and I'll honor God. Daniel, he was giving up a lot. He was risking a lot. And like Daniel and his friends, we live in a culture. All of us are immersed in a culture where we are called and encouraged and pushed to conform. How we think, what we value, who we are, these are all things that we're constantly being shaped and molded in. And Daniel is an example of one who remains grounded and faithful in the midst of terribly difficult situations. I mean, he could have just gone with the flow because there were other youth, Hebrew youth, who were saying, I'll just eat from it. There were others around him who were making these choices, but Daniel decided to be set apart. But again, it roots back into early prayer, early fasting. He resolved not to defile himself. And just a quick side note here is that his resolve was not out of rebellion, it was out of trust. Some of you are the protesters, you're the rebels of like, nope, I'm not doing that, and I'm going to let everyone know why I'm not doing that. Like, that's you. That's just the way you're wired. It's real. Just be honest about it. But Daniel, in this case, he could have gone that route. But he did something really unique. He asked for permission. He had his convictions. He resolved not to defile himself, but he asked. He asked for permission. And we see in here that he asked the chief official. But again, let me remind you, he asked God first. Again, he had resolved early on. I am sure he was praying, saying, hey, I know the situation is coming. I know I'm going to be put in this place where I have to make a choice, where I'm going to want to compromise, where I'm going to want to go with the flow. But God, give me the strength, give me the eyes to see, give me the wisdom. Lord, grant me favor that those in authority over me would honor this request. I wonder how many of our own roadblocks and strongholds would crumble if we asked as well. I wonder how many of our roadblocks and strongholds would crumble if we just faithfully prayed about whatever the situation is, that roadblock, that stronghold. And not only prayed to God, but that we asked another person to come alongside us. That we humbled ourselves and said, hey, I need help. I can't do this on my own. Will you help me? Because maybe that stronghold and roadblock will come down with God doing a work in us and around us and through us. And this is the next question for you to ponder. What do you need to ask God for and request from another person? Yeah, God can do all sorts of miraculous things, but he uses people around us to break through. Just take a moment and reflect on that. Verse 9, chapter 1. I want you to notice who's the catalyst, who makes this happen, this favor and compassion. It says, now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, I am afraid, my lord, the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king then would have my head because of you." Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." There's another thing here. Now, I don't like to ask for help. Maybe you can relate. I like to think I can do it on my own. And also, when I ask for help, I really have a hard time when I get a no. Anyone relate? Yep. It's not fun. And so my personality is like, all right, I tried, I asked. I'm good. All right, I'm going to figure out another way. Something Daniel did here. He got pushed back, and then he came at it again. Still respectfully, he asked again. Because God had convicted him, had shown him something. He resolved not to defile himself. So we can expect some maybe pushback, or that initial pushback that we're going to be discouraged with, or we're going to want to run from. We'll go back to God and say, all right, God, how do I take this next step? I feel like I just want to run or do it on my own. God, what is this next reality? What is this next step for me? And so he asked this other question. And then in verse 14, we see, so he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. There was favor again. So what happens is there's this veggie and water fast for 10 days. This is what has been referred to as the Daniel fast. It's eliminating meats and animal products and breads and processed foods. Verse 15 says, at the end of 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and their wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. Now, we can be really quick to look at this and be like, oh, it's just clean eating. I mean, that's clean eating. You get all that junk out of your body, you're just going to be able to understand things more. But we see in Scripture here, it says that God gave them these things, gave them knowledge, gave them understanding, gave them this learning. They could understand the visions. They resolved not to defile themselves. There's fasting and prayer, and God's hand poured out on them, this knowledge and understanding and visions. And during these 3 years, this is what God did. They depended on God. They drew near to God in this way. And in verse 18 says, at the end of the time set by the king to bring them into service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And so they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. Daniel and his friends, they chose to be set apart within the culture that they were in. Now, I don't want to read too far into Scripture and read what's not there. But there's one thing that Daniel stood for, right? He said, I'm not going to eat the food from the king's table. There were other things that happened to him. He was given a different name. He could have fought against that. But Daniel knew who he was. Like, people can call me whatever. I know who I am. They were taught, it says, literature and learning because they were tested. You saw that there. They went before the king, and the king gave them the same test that he gave to everyone else. Daniel didn't push back against the education system that was there. They knew who God was, and they continued to seek God and learn about God within the culture that they were in. They didn't even, that we can tell here, point to other people who were eating from the king's table and shame them. They were resolute in what they had decided. And so it's very easy to point at other people and be like, well, if this person was doing this, or this Christian, they say they're a Christian and they're doing this, or I can't believe they've made this choice. What is that conviction that God has placed on your heart, that the Spirit of God is placing on you in the world that you live in? What are you being fed? I mean, we are constantly taking in all sorts of messages. I don't care if you listen to just Christian radio or all radio or news radio or TV or social media or whatever, like friends, people, school, like you cannot escape it. As hard as you try, you are taking in messages. So what are you being fed? And is it satisfying you? Or is it what God is feeding you? Is that satisfying you? What about your identity? We'll get to these questions in a second. What about your identity? Like, who are you? Who are you? And two, what do you think? Like, what is truth? So in what ways are you being molded and conformed to the world? And in what ways am I being set apart and transformed by God? Have you taken time just to consider this? Of in what ways may I be choosing not to be resolute about something, or I'm being defiled by something, or I'm not fasting and praying and asking God what this transformation is, who he's created me to be. What is this? In what ways? There's no way that you can really get a good, clear answer in just a few moments here. Something to ponder. How am I being conformed to the world? How am I being transformed by God? What does that inventory in your life look like? And so I want to invite you the next 21 days to consider these questions and to do it through prayer and fasting. To disrupt the rhythm of life and choose prayer and fasting. Now, we've provided resources on the weekly online. There are a bunch of resources on types of fast and types of prayer, where you can pray with others, daily reading plans, discussion questions that you can do individually or even better with a group. There's a couple sheets that are sitting out in the old coffee bar that look like this, that have a lot of these same elements, keys to fasting and prayer, types of fast, types of prayer, where to pray with others, what to pray for. And you're welcome to take one of these. So whether it's online or a piece of paper, you're welcome. But I want to encourage you is how's God encouraging you, tapping you on the shoulder? In what ways in the next 3 weeks can I commit to prayer? Is there a certain spot, a certain time that you are going to choose that this is where I'm going to pray, this is how I'm going to pray, this is what I'm going to pray about? For fasting, there's multiple different ways to fast. There's, as it says on here and online, there's a complete fast, which is only liquids, typically water with light juices. I would not recommend that unless you're already fasting to do that the entire 21 days. But maybe you choose a day that you can do that. Or a meal removal fast, that you're going to skip 1 or 2 meals a day on a certain day each week. That every Tuesday I'm going to skip lunch, and I'm going to spend that half an hour that I would have had at lunch, or 15 minutes or whatever, in prayer. Or maybe it's a partial fast, is that there's a certain time period that you're going to not eat. Or a selective fast, like the Daniel fast, where there's certain things that are just eliminated out of your diet. And so you can read more about that online, and you can read about that on the sheet here. The question I asked earlier was, in what ways is God asking you to trust him? I mean, at the heart, it's about drawing near to God, to understand God, and to further trust him more. Prayer and fasting is a tool. It's an invitation. It is a way. It's an opportunity for you to maybe break some rhythms in your life, to incorporate some new rhythms. And I would just say, just try it. Just test it. I mean, what happens if you commit to this? Believe God is faithful, and that God is going to respond. That God is going to speak into whatever area, some of these questions about transformation or conforming, whatever it may be. So what is it that God is calling you to in these next number of days? What does that look like? Maybe it's talking about someone in your household. Hey, let's do this together. Or a friend. Hey, hold me accountable. Let's do this. And to walk through this season. I want to close with prayer, and then I think we're going to sing a song as we wrap up. I want to invite the team to come. Just ask that you would pause again and maybe reflect upon a word or a phrase, one of the questions that was asked earlier, just for you to talk with God. And prayer, just at its rawest form, is listening to God and talking with God. Some of you, that's really comfortable for you. Others, you think it's the weirdest thing in the world. And that's okay. Wherever you're at, be honest. But I invite you to listen, just to pause, and to talk to God as you would talk to a friend. So would you just take a moment, and I'll lead us in prayer.